Welcome to Dr. M's Vodcast, a vodcast with a mission to connect continuous improvement professionals across the world.
Hi, namaste, and welcome to Dr. M's Lounge. To do standard work, otherwise Mark will get a little upset, so let me do the standard work. Here we go. Hey, welcome to Dr. M's Launch. This is the episode number 12, and nice to have you all across. All my launch programs are dedicated to my sensei, Masaki Imai, and well, I can't go further without introducing Nakao, that's Mark Deluzio sensei, along with this quote from Mark Deluzio's book in Fatline, where Nakao-san says, this is what Mark has quoted, in early days, Nakao-san told me that I am a discipline of Teiichi Ohno and I must dedicate my life to lean. And those of us who know Mark Deluzio, we have always seen that he is in line with his commitment to his sensei. So two mentors of Mark Deluzio. Here we have Iwata. He's next to Teiichi Ohno. And then you have Nakao and today's guest speaker, Mark Deluzio. We're going to talk about business language essential for continuous improvement professional. This is a 101. Later on, we'll tell you what we're going to do further. So I'm just going to dart it across to Mark Deluzio. This is the agenda that we have. What is business acumen? Why is it this important? And how can you gain business and financial acumen? Here we go, Mark. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. N. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. You got to bear with me, everybody, because I have a bad cold. And yesterday, if we were to do this yesterday, I would not be able to do it because I couldn't talk. And my wife was very happy, by the way, because I couldn't talk. But anyway, I'm going to try to get through it. I think I'll be okay. May not sound perfect, but that's okay. What this is about, this is an introduction to how can you become a better lean professional. And it doesn't even mean that, you are in a lean position, but maybe you're running an operation like Dirk is, for example. Okay. How can you communicate better with leadership? And one of the things I've noticed is we seem to go towards leadership and talk to leadership, and we talk past each other. We don't really take time sometimes. I'm not saying everybody, it's a generalization, but I see this a lot. Many don't take the time to find out what's on that leader's mind. How do they get measured? How do they, what's important to them? And even though they will tell you that engagement and respect for people and all that stuff is really important to them, you got to think about it. What else are they going to say? Right? They'll never deny that. But at the end of the day, they're trying to figure out, hey, I got a bonus to make. Okay. My boss wants me to get this much profitability, and I hate to say it, but if we don't meet them where they are, we can never have the conversation with them about all the things we think they should be listening to us about, like engagement, like respect for people, like problem solving at the lowest level. How many people have worked for a company that just didn't allow enough time or didn't allow enough, didn't provide the framework for doing Kaizen? But then again, you'd say, well, the leaders don't wanted results. They still wanted results, but they didn't give anybody the framework in which to succeed. Okay. So if we can't at least, and I call this a seat at the table, if you can't at least get a seat at the table and have a meaningful conversation, then it's going to be a problem. Now, part of this is to be able to speak a language that not everybody's attuned to speaking with. Some are, some are not, and some maybe it's partial. But I'm going to go through that, and I'm going to talk about this thing called business acumen. And if you could think of yourself as a business person first and a lean person maybe second, I think my personal experience is you'll have a lot more success getting the leadership and getting them to listen to you. Okay. So that's why that's important. You got to have that entree to start discussing what really is going to be the key things to drive a transformation. Now, you don't have to sell them on everything on day one, right? Like, for example, problem solving at the lowest level. You may not be doing that today. Okay, fine. Don't try to get that in the first half hour meeting. Okay. Find out what's important to them. Okay. Find out what exactly is on their mind and what is meaningful to them. So, part of this is this whole business and financial acumen that I want to talk about. Okay. So, this slide, I posted this on LinkedIn the other day. I'm going to make sure you guys. This is what I mean by the business acumen of what you need to be well versed in. Now, does that mean, many times we come at it with all the lean tools, we start at the tool level, sometimes forget about the principles. But how does lean or continuous improvement or whatever method that you're using integrate in all these different areas on the right? All right. Now, does this mean you have to be a technical wizard and a financial wizard, operational wizard? No, absolutely not. A strategic planning wizard? No. But you need to at least be somewhat familiar with each one of these bubbles to start having a more comprehensive conversation with your leaders. Okay. And I see that's a big miss in a lot of ways. And we, like I said, we talk past each other as lean professionals. And I see it on LinkedIn all the time. So, and I've seen it in practice as well. And for those of you who've been around a lot, Dirk, Lonnie, some others on this call, Colleen, I believe that you probably know what I'm talking about, right? And so we talk past each other. So these type of I'm not going to get into every one of these today. I just want to kind of frame this up and talk about overall the type of thing we need to look at when we want to be that well-rounded lean professional or transformation professional. Remember, we're trying to transform an enterprise, not a department, not a function, not just operations, okay? Not just engineering. We're trying to see how all of these functions in a company work together with one muscle. And I still will say to this day, and it's my experience, that if you try to optimize any one function in kind of like in a bubble, okay? You try to optimize any one function, you're going to end up you're going to sub-optimize the organization, the enterprise. No question about it. And I've seen that movie so many times, okay? And I'll tell you, there's one real case study here. at a client. We were trying to do Hajunka level scheduling, standard work, one piece flow. We set up cells, all this stuff. Their sales team was not in concert with what was going on the operations side. And because the sales guys wanted to make their bonus, they ended up discounting the heck out of the product and enticing their customers to take product early at the end of the quarter. So they got, in that last month, they got 30% of their orders in the last 2 days of the month. So not only did we have to discount in order to entice customers to take our product early, we also had to incur tremendous cost to try to get it produced, which, by the way, they didn't. Okay, they didn't complete it. However, the people in sales got their bonuses. They won the President's Award. They got their cruises for their family and vacations and all that. So the sales department won, but the enterprise lost. Okay. And I always like to go back to principles. And the principle that was broken here was very simple, just in time. We actually not forced, but enticed our customers to be able to take the product early, which is a violation of just in time principles. It's probably a violation of a couple other principles as well. Okay. So whenever you have something like this going on and you're violating a principle, it's going to come back and hurt you one way or the other. And you got to remember that organization suffered greatly. And what happened was the very next quarter, to the chief financial officer say, "Hey, we don't have any orders. We have to lay people off." Are you kidding me? No, you're not going to lay people off. Okay. But that's a kind of disruption to the business because the sales guys try to make their bonus. Okay. So that's just one example. I'm sure you guys have a lot of examples like that where you optimize the function and you didn't, right, optimize the enterprise. But getting back to this, if I need to have some knowledge of these particular areas, okay? And I'm not an engineer, but I can go toe to toe with any engineer, okay? Because I know how to ask the right questions. All right. I have been in sales positions. I've negotiated contracts, but I wouldn't say I'm a great salesman, right? But I know enough about it to be able to ask the right questions, right? And again, all these questions that you end up asking should be in the text of the principle of lean, okay, of what we're trying to do here. So I'll leave it at that. But these are the areas, and there's all kinds of things that you could do to educate yourself in these various different areas, right? So I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is just a very basic slide that I actually pulled out of my my presentation for helping veterans in terms of starting businesses. And these are the three basic financial statements. Okay. The income statement, which is sometimes called a profit and loss statement, the balance sheet, which has all your assets, liabilities, and equity, how much the business is worth, and your cash flow statement in terms of how much money did your business generate from a cash perspective. Now, I don't want to make this an accounting course right now, but I just want to let you know that this is something that you need to be familiar with the components of this and understand it. I'm not saying you have to be able to sit down and actually put one together. I'm not saying that you have to be, go get your CPA or CMA. What I am saying, though, is you should be able to have a meaningful conversation about how your efforts affect these documents. Okay. It's very important. And financials are the language of business, right? And so normally you're going to find that your leaders are all tied, their compensation is tied into some facet of these three statements. It could be, bottom line profits. It could be inventory reduction, inventory turns, which you find on the balance sheet. It could be your cash flow statement. It could be all kinds of things, right? But becoming, and why I'm showing you this versus some of the other stuff is because I think this one is an important one for you to be. If I was going to tell you, hey, you got to start somewhere, this is one of the places I have you start first. Okay. And I threw this one up too. By the way, can I ask you a question? I've got all my pictures on the bottom. Do you see the pictures of yourselves on the bottom? You don't. Good. Okay. I'm gonna make sure it's not blocking the screen. The other part of this is the strategic plan, and we all talk about strategy deployment. I'm not talking about strategy now. I'm talking about what is our strategic plan, okay? And do we know? Do we know what the strategy is for your particular business or your unit or your division and how that fits in? Because I still hold, and I don't like to give numbers, but a majority of your Kaizen efforts should be pointed towards your strategic imperatives. Okay. So to me, strategy is very easy, and this is how we defined it at Danaher. What game are we playing, and how are we going to win? It's that simple. Okay. And so these happen to be all the components of your classical strategic plan. And at Danaher, we actually sat down because all of our general managers thought they knew how to do strategy because they're never going to tell you they don't know how, right? Of course not. But they didn't. So we sat down. Actually, it was Larry Culpin. I sat down. He came to me one day and said, Mark, we need to put work together for strategic planning. And we did. So there's just like with budgets and everything else that you guys might do, financials is very regimented. You have your expenses to fill out. You have your all the different data that's required. Well, strategic planning is no different. We had, I don't know how many, there's 14, I think, here. I'm covering up the slide. Yeah. There's 14 parts of a strategic plan that we use. And this was our standard work for for a strategy. Okay. And so being able to have conversant with your leadership about how your efforts are affecting your strategy is really important. Now, of course, deploying strategies through the Hoshin or strategy deployment process, I'm not talking about that today, but that's how we implement the strategy. Okay. You can plan all you want, but if you can't implement, it's not going to matter. So this is another area I'd say if I had to pick two, I'd get involved in these two. Okay. And there's a lot of courses out there that you can take. And matter of fact, I think I did a YouTube video on strategy. There's I am going to be doing workshops on the the financial acumen and the seat at the table type of concept. But these are the things that we're looking at. So just some questions. Can you answer these in the affirmative? Do you know your strategic objectives? Do you know how your boss and your boss's boss are measured and compensated? Very important to know. Very important to know. You disagree with how they're compensated, but that's not up to you. Okay. You've got to know what makes them tick and understand, and they may be ill-founded metrics. They may be all lagging indicators. We talked about lagging indicators at one of my podcasts, right? A lagging indicator, I like to use it like I'm trying to lose weight. And when I look at the scale and the pounds or kgs on the scale, that's a lagging indicator. And if I only measure without controlling the leading indicators, which could be, calories, how much sleep do I get, how much exercise do I have, maybe those are the leading indicators that will affect the lagging indicator. Okay. Most of the time on Gemba boards and in all these other, KPI measurement programs and compensation programs, we're talking about lagging indicators. We're not really measuring the things that matter that's going to drive the lagging indicator. Okay. So that's just a little tip on your end that if you're looking at your KPI boards and all you see is lagging indicators, you might have to retrench a little bit and go back and and figure out how to measure the things that really matter. Now, by the way, I'm not saying you don't measure a lagging indicator. I'm not saying that at all. Okay. Again, let me give you another case study. Sorry. I had a big mining company I was working with, and they were measuring output, production, right? And that's all they were looking at. We needed to get so many tons yesterday, and we got 20% less. So I asked the question. I said, "What are the two major reasons why you didn't get it?" They said, "Well, our fuel injectors on our trucks were clogging up. They're bad quality fuel injectors. And secondly, was availability of drivers." Well, as I centered in on fuel injectors, this is what I found. There was a separate department that was ordering fuel injectors for their trucks. And these are huge, huge, huge trucks, right? And the department that ordered and procured the fuel injectors was measured on cost. So what did they do? They went and bought fuel injectors from secondhand, not OEM parts, because they're more expensive. They bought them from China. Okay. They were failing miserably, right? And but they got their metrics because they did really well on their purchase price variance, which by the way is a measure that I would highly recommend you eliminate. I eliminated it when I developed lean accounting. It just drives the wrong behavior. The other thing was they had a lot of part shortages in fuel injectors. They had a big electronic board to tell everybody what these shortages were. So they institutionalized stockouts. Okay? They actually institutionalized it. I said, you guys aren't going to change this, are you? Right? Because you got that board up there and you're just going to live with this, aren't you? You're not going to fix this. Well, it was in another department. Okay? So here's an example of a department winning, but the company losing. All right? Now, they were not tied into the people at the parts, were not tied into uptime. They were not tied into availability. They're only measured on cost. Okay. But a leading indicator would have been, the fuel injector, at least measuring that and figuring out by what vendor, by what size truck, what model truck, what engine, what driver. It could have been a driver issue. I don't know. All kinds of different Paretos on that to try to get to the bottom of this, right? But you see, there's another example where we're not all talking the same language and looking towards the same objectives on what was important to the company. All right. The fourth bullet point. What about the three most immediate needs? If somebody came up to you and said, "Hey, tell me what the three things if you have to work on anything, what are those three things you're going to work on, and why is it important? How does that tie back to your strategic plan?" Okay. And can you regularly discuss the following metrics? I only threw a few down here, but do you know how to calculate gross margin? If somebody say, "Hey, our gross margin is X," do you know what that means? Do you know what EBITDA means? Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And how is that different than EBIT? And how is that different than gross margin? Net promoter score, that's a quality score with your customers. Free cash flow, inventory turns. Do you know how to calculate them? Accounts receivable, days outstanding. Huge opportunity for most companies to drive cash flow. Okay. How do you measure in-process quality, or do you even measure it? Or is that at the end of the line? Okay. Employee attrition rate. All right. All these things are important things to look at. And depending on the company, it may or may not be, they may be a different priority for you guys, right? I can almost guarantee you, though, in-process quality would always be on top of your list, right? And some of these are leading, some of these are lagging, right? So all I'm saying is, are you conversant with these metrics, and do you know what they all mean, right? And that's not a complete list, by the way. So can you talk financial metrics, customer metrics, customer complaints, employee engagement? There's respect for people. Okay, I'm not going to ignore that. Issues of the day, employee safety. A lot of times you go in and I see a lot of companies and they show up and they just wait for the next fire to start and then they go to work. There's no plan. There's no proactive way that, hey, we're going to go and build something somewhere in terms of improvement, right? So what ends up happening is um, you go in and you're very reactive, and it turns into problem fixing, not problem solving, right? And there's a big difference. And you guys might have heard me say this before. My first trip to Japan in 1990 with Iwata Nakao at Toyota. Matter of fact, it happened to be the month of April 1990. That's the month that Ono died. And I never got a chance to meet Ono. But anyway, um, they told me at that one visit that the difference between a world class company and one that's not is their ability to solve problems. And then he went on to joke and he said, even the great Toyota has problems, but we only solve our problems once. Okay. Think about that. Solve, not fix. How many times have you fixed a problem just to have it rear its ugly head a couple of weeks later or a couple of months later? You didn't really fix it. You, you didn't really solve it. You fixed it, right? So something to think about. And I'm just going to throw one of the questions, Dr. M, was what's my favorite metric financially anyway? And I just love this one. It's called free cash flow as a percent of net income. Okay. And here's the calculation. You take your operating cash flow minus your capital expenditures, divide and that over your net income. If you're over one in this metric, you're doing good, because what this means is that you're generating cash above and beyond your your profits, which means that you are actually moving your balance sheet. The three balance sheet items are inventory, accounts payable, and accounts receivable, less accounts payable. That's your working capital. Okay. That means that you're actually moving the working capital accounts to be able to generate cash. It's not just net income. Okay. So, and then capital expenditures come off this number as well, because it is a cash flow item, right? On average, good lean companies should be around 2% or lower on CapEx. I just looked at Danaher, they're over 5%, which really surprised me. Um, but, and again, depending on who you are, and you know, I'm not saying that 2% is a holy grail where we always have to follow that. What I am saying is, though, that, you know, over the course of time, you should not be spending 5% of your revenues on on CapEx. Okay. And if you apply lean to this, and I have a episode out there on Lean 911 that talks about the criteria that I use as a CFO to qualify whether or not the CapEx was legit in terms of lean principles and everything else, right? So a lot of financial guys like to look at, you know, net present value or return on investment. That's all funny money. I hate to say it. It's funny money. You cannot take ROI, return on investment percentage, to the bank. Okay. I tried to do it one time. I almost got arrested. Okay. So, but, um, so you can't do that. It's all about cash. Okay. So this is my favorite. And on subsequent, you know, episodes on the seat at the table that I do, I'm going to go into this a lot more deeper to show you how this math works, and all that. But to me, this is a nice overarching number. Now you got to be careful, because if your leaders are not measured on anything like this, it may fall on deaf ears. Okay, who knows what they're measured on? I've seen all kinds of things. I was on the compensation committee for a public board, and I try to get more meaningful metrics into that equation, but it was always about shareholder return. You know, shareholder return, relative and general shareholder return. Um, and that to me is a big lagging indicator, right? But anyway, to no avail, I was not successful, but I was trying to get more meaningful numbers involved in this, okay? So, Dr. M, that is it. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as a real quick uh, primer here. and then we can open it up to questions.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Good to go? Yeah,
Yes.
so when you're in an industry such as, let's say, healthcare or even a banking industry, how would you see those numbers, for example, inventory, change? How are you going to shift your view so that you're still utilizing this model, but you're not talking about, inventory turns in the classic sense?
Yeah, because their inventory is cash, right? And they don't want cash because they want to loan it out. Um, in the financial services and also in insurance, um, I didn't lose you, did I? Okay. One of the things, and this probably applies to all businesses, Colleen, is lead time. Okay. If you're going for a mortgage, for example, and I tell you it's going to take 8 weeks to qualify your loan, when you know damn well it's probably only a 2 or 3 hour underwriting endeavor. But because they're not set up in any kind of flow, they do it in batch, first in, first out. If I can do those mortgages in a day, okay, that's a winner. Those are the kind of things I would look at. What's important to the customer? How can I use the capabilities of lean to drive profitable growth? All right. As a matter of fact, GE Money, way back when we did one that was on the retail credit cards, and this is all public knowledge. GE buys this, but they were taking 63 days to process and underwrite a an application for the little credit card machines that you see in restaurants and all kinds of stores. We got it done in one day. They wanted to go to 20. I said, if you 20, I'm leaving. I'm not doing this. It only took an hour to process it, right? So we got it down, and there was a lot of things we do with systems and with the the proliferation of types of kits that they had. They always stocked out. Everybody ordering these different things that was not important to the customer. We got it done in one day. In the first year, that business picked up an additional $216 million of revenue because we got the lead time down. Because what was happening was you open up a jewelry store and you don't have a credit facility and it takes 63 days. Well, guess what? You're going to go somewhere else. And that's what was happening. Right. So we did not let them, we didn't give them the time to make another decision. Okay. So you got to look at what's important for the business. Mortgage loans is a really good, an insurance company, for example. We worked on one where the processing a claim took 250 days. And because customers were complaining to the brokers about how long it took to process a claim, the brokers didn't want to give uh, any new business to the insurance company. Okay. They're only winning 6% of their quotes, right? And underwriting. So there's another example. Okay. So you got to look at what really drives the business from the customer's perspective and how can you use lean to differentiate yourself in quality, in lead time, delivery, service, all that good stuff, right? That's what you really got to look at. Does that make sense?
Oh,
By the way,
absolutely.
I went to the Federal Reserve in Cleveland, and I did see inventory of money, and they were burning it. Big 4x4x4 Gaylord pallets of money going into the furnace. And I'm standing there looking at it saying, hey, can you guys like give me a sample? What do you think? But anyway,
Yeah. So I would have a question for you, Mark. Hi, it's Ovi. So
Obi,
my question, yeah. So my question would be, if you were sitting in front of a VP or board member, what would be your favorite financial argument to promote lean?
well, it's not financial, really. It's exactly what I just said. If
Okay.
we could take waste out, reduce lead times, Lead time is missed by so many lean professionals. Okay. Reduce the lead time. Well, we can sell more business. Okay. The profits follow that. Okay. And of course, quality's got to be there too. One of the businesses that we integrated at Danaher was over in the UK, and they made temperature controllers. And we were a niche player. We were competing against Honeywell and Siemens. And this business, when we bought it, had a 28-day lead time, so they said. And they said that they were better than their competition because their competition's at 35. Well, the managing director at the time thought that was a discernible competitive advantage. It was not. Okay. And so I said, what if we can get you down to 3 days? And he did not believe me that we get him down to 3 days. We got him down to, it took about 9 months. We cellularized, did all the things that you're supposed to do, standard work, all that. And we did get his lead time down to 3 days. Now, what happened is a lot of his business was going to distribution. Okay. And again, knowing how your customer, what's important to your customer, in distribution, there's something called GMROI, gross margin return on investment, ROI, return on investment. That's how they get paid. Well, what's their biggest investment? Inventory. Okay. So with the old 28-day lead time, they were carrying 45 days of inventory. Okay. When we went down to 3 days, we were only carrying a little bit over a week. And their giveaway, when everybody at the our distribution base got their bonuses and all that stuff, right? So thinking about how that works, that business, and again, we were competing against big players like Honeywell and Siemens. That business went from 30,000 units a year to 100, okay? More than tripled, almost 4 times, okay? Because we had the best lead time and we had the best quality, okay? And by the way, our inventory turns went from about 3 to 18 in that time frame. Okay. And our on-time delivery, they said that they were tracking at 95% on-time delivery, the customer promise date, which I think is not a good number, right? You got to look at customer request date. And when we recalibrated their on-time delivery, it was down to 30%. We ended up getting up in the high 90s, like 98, 99. It wasn't perfect, but to request date. Okay. So we were the logical people that they wanted to do business with, right? And all that. Now, with that being said, something I'd like to say about that is that could be a short-lived thing over a couple of years because if your competitors catch on and they do the same thing and they end up, hiring Ricardo to go in and work with them, then that company's in trouble, right? Because now they'll catch up. So you got to innovate. You got to innovate on a lot of different things, whether it's manufacturing process or some other way to, to satisfy the customer. So even though we make these great gains, like the one I just described, you can't always bank on those going to be there for you forever, right? And you always have to think about innovation and moving to the next level and staying ahead of your customer. So
Yeah, so if I just to sum up what you're saying is you would structure the direct discussion around the lead time and then derive all the financial benefits from there.
yeah,
Lead time
I'd start with
reduction.
growth. I would start with growth.
Okay.
I might have this discussion. I might sit down and say, hey, how can through our operational excellence, if we can do what we think we can do, what do you think will happen on the revenue side, on the growth side? What if we could put through 3 times as much product with the same resources? Okay, you don't have to do the math at that point. They're smart. They know. You don't have to do the math. They'll know damn well that, wow, yeah, financially that's going to be a really good thing. Okay, uh, and so I mean, Jake Break, where DBS got started, where I started, um, we went from 16 million to 230 million with the same UAW headcount. Okay, same headcount, and we freed up 50% of the floor space, and then refilled it up with new business as we got new business in Asia. And inventory turns went past 30 from like 2. Uh, Productivity, which I'm not always a big fan of measuring productivity because it drives the wrong behavior sometimes, um, was at 3 or 4 kits per 100 man hours. We went past 45. Okay. And nobody was working harder, by the way. Matter of fact, people were working easier because there weren't as many disruptions with standard work. You take away all the irregularities, and people say, "Oh, people must have worked a lot harder." No, they did not work harder. It was actually a better place to work because we got rid of a lot of the firefighting that we were accustomed to use. So I like to start with Avi. I like to start with growth, okay, and saying how can we use this as and the word to use is competitive weapon. How can we use what we do in lean as a competitive weapon? Okay, and if you talk that way, I mean that's neat. That's neat language, right? I mean, you know, especially if they're military guys or ladies. But how can we use what we do as a competitive weapon to win? Okay, that's how I would approach it, right? And by the way, all the things that you guys work on, quality, uh, time, right? Taking out all the muda, right? All that stuff is part of that. I mean, you know, so that's how I look at it anyway.
So cash flow, you wouldn't touch it, or
Oh, sure, no, sure. Well, again, I want to find out how that leader that I'm talking to gets measured. Okay,
right,
all right,
right.
okay, because they may not be measured on cash flow. You although cash flow to me is the real key, the whole thing, right? Um, so any business really. I mean, theoretically, your stock price is a function of the present value of your future cash flows. At least that's what they taught me in finance class. Whether or not that's true or not, I don't know. But uh, but if you think about that, I first want to know what they get measured on. If he's getting measured on EBITDA, oh yeah, sure, I talk about cash because that's a big component of it. EBITDA really, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, is um, is really the cash earnings of the business, not counting capex. Okay, but the cash earnings of the business, the business ability to generate cash, and that's what we look at. So yeah,
Thank you.
sure. By the way, inventory is the same way, Avi. You take inventory down, that's a cash flow plus, right?
Right.
And same with wheels. And payables are the opposite, right? But what you don't, we got to be careful with payables because I've seen companies at the end of the year just not pay their bills so that their working capital returns look good. And then in January, suppliers put everybody on COD, cash on delivery, and then all of a sudden the operations can't produce, right? So you got to be very careful what you do there.
Can you give me 2 minutes so that I'm the custodian for questions and Mark is a custodian for answers. So let me just check my inventory of questions so that we ensure that Mark has responded, Rag has responded to all of them, but just for my sake, yeah. Is there a favorite metrics of those in C-suite? Are there any metrics that mean more in certain sectors? Why is business language considered essential in competitive intelligence professional? How to deal with who are confident traditional thinking CEOs? How should an internal lean leader begin with an experiment? And then we have a hypothetical question which says, yeah, about the top leadership, he only knows that lean is a manpower reduction. He has very poor vision about people development. He will only take big moves if there is sound direction from headquarters, etc. So these are some questions. I think most of them are answered. If there is anything that is left out, would you want to fill it up, Mark? This is random.
Well, I don't know. Some of those questions you can spend an hour on just on one. But if you can put them back up again, Yes, does the C-suite have a favorite metric? That's going to vary from company to company. Everybody's looking for profitability. Um, you got to remember, accounting profits, when you look at a profit and loss statement, has all kinds of garbage in there. Okay, it has reserves. If it's done on the accrual basis, you know, and I'll tell you a story about when I was the CFO for George Koenigsegger. We were taking inventory down like crazy. This goes back to Avi, what you alluded to. Um, we're taking inventory like crazy. Well, when you take inventory down, you are not taking your production costs and putting them on the balance sheet in this account called inventory. Okay. What you're doing is you're shipping the product. Okay. So as you take inventory down, there's no offset to profitability. If I put $1 million into inventory, that will show as a favorable credit to my fixed overhead absorption variance. Okay. So in general, by the way, I was saying this in general. When I take inventory down, I'm going to hurt my profits, my accounting profits. Okay. However, so the Rales brothers, the two guys that started Danner, the multi billionaires, called up and said, "Hey, we hear all this great stuff at Jake Break, but what's going on with the profits, right?" So they flew down on the corporate jet, came in. Now here I was young, 30-something year, young 30s as a CFO, and I explained to these multi-billionaires, and what I said to them was, "Look, the stuff that you report to Wall Street and how you calculate earnings per share and all your accounting profits are," I said, "that's all BS." I said to them, and they laughed. What really matters here is cash. So I showed them the cash flow statement, taking down inventory and generating cash. And these guys are brilliant guys. And they said, "You know what? We got it." It was a 20-minute meeting. They went out and did a plant tour, and they flew away. Okay. So, if you can drive the cash, um, then everything else kind of takes care of itself. Now, this is why you need an informed CFO, because if the CFO doesn't understand how his accounting profits don't matter, and it's hard to tell a CFO that, okay, especially when the bonuses are tied to that, then you're going to have a problem. A big problem, because we're taking inventory down. I've actually had a couple of CEOs in my time say, "We just need to build inventory, else we're going to get killed on our bonuses." See, so here's another example where you're not aligned. All right, the company's not aligned, and that bonus structure is forcing you to do unlean things. Okay, and I've seen it a million times, so many times. We got to put inventory back in. We got to build inventory. Wow, that's kind of, we don't need inventory. Why do you want us to do that? And by the way, the inventory's got to come out sooner or later. Either it comes out as cost of sales when you sell it, or you write it off as obsolete, which is in a lot of cases what happens. Okay, so
Mark, I have a number of memos that I could add to your "Stop Doing This" series, and one of them is around a memo that has a C-suite, our CFO, saying, "Hey, cash is the most important thing, but remember, we are a build to stock business, so we need to keep that inventory high."
wow.
So I have one of those things that we could keep framed and just say there's something not right with this memo that goes out.
By the way, there's nothing wrong with keeping inventory. Okay, there's a book written by
Excessively
Robert Wall.
high.
Yeah, no, I hear you, Brian. I hear you. Called Zero Inventories, and it was really a bad title because everybody thought lean was about zero inventories, right? And can you imagine going to shopping for a car and you go to the car dealership, and there's no cars on the lot? How about your grocery store? Try that for zero inventories. Or you go to a restaurant and you order food, and they say, "Oh no, we don't have the inventory because we're zero inventory," right? So inventory is kind of like the lifeblood of your business, right? The question with inventory is it the right inventory based on your capabilities? So if you have a Kanban, for example, between two processes and you got a pull system going, okay, you most likely calculated that Kanban based on the capabilities of your process. And you might have added a safety stock, which mean the safety stock to me is a stock number that will compensate for operational problems. And you might have another layer of inventory called buffer stock, which has to do with forecasting errors or demand errors. Okay. The better you get at your lead time and your capabilities, you can take that Kanban down. So one of the things I recommend is go to any one of your Kanbans within your company. Let's say internal, right? And ask this question. What if we took this Kanban down by 50%? Just cut it in half. Oh no, you can't do now get your notepad out, okay? No, you can't do that. Well, why? Well, because we have a problem with machine uptime. Okay, write that down. We have a problem with our supplier delivery on inventory. Okay, write that down. We have a problem with go down the list. Quality. Okay, write that down. You got your next three Kaizens. Okay, because use Kanban, and Nikau taught us this. Use Kanban as an improvement tool. Just go in and say, hey, I'm going to reduce it by 50%. What do you think? Now, you're not going to do that, okay? Because you're going to end up shorting the customer. But ask that question and see what they tell you. And when they tell you that, it's like, okay, we just got our three. I don't need value stream mapping. Pretty easy, okay? You see what I'm saying? It's not that, you know. And Colleen just wrote this in, but that's correct. You know, Nikau told us his quote was Kanban is an admission of failure to do one piece flow. Okay. Does that mean you get rid of Kanbans? No, of course not. You got to work towards getting rid of them and connecting processes. I was just with a client a couple of weeks ago, and they put induction heat treat in their cell. And instead of going to this big outside process of heat treat, they put induction heat treat on a one piece flow basis. Okay. Now, before that, they had Kanbans going back and forth between heat treat and the operations. They don't need that anymore. So, makes sense. I'm not sure I addressed all those questions, Dr. M, but
That's fair enough.
I don't think there's one number. I mean, all the obvious ones with profitability and all that stuff, but there's not that one number that different businesses might have different pinch points that they want to look at. So
That's fair. We got 3 minutes more to an hour, and I take this opportunity to recognize two individuals here who prompted me to put up this topic. One is Ovi Contreras, when in one of the shows, which was Dilemma of a Continuous Improvement Employee. I got it right, Ovi. And one of the things that he said was about not being able to speak the business language. The other gentleman sitting over here told me 3 years ago, when I met him at the airport in Mumbai, is Doug Fisher, who sits over here. And we chatted, and he said, continuous improvement professionals have to talk business language. Well, I'm sorry, Doug, for the next 2 years, I was not keeping all that well, but I did not give up that, so I brought it up again. And whenever you see Doug's LinkedIn, oh God, yeah, that's the start of my surgery. Mark, want to remind me of that? So, Doug, in all fairness, every time that I see your post over there, you have been thumping the desk saying, continuous improvement professional, learn the financial statements, understand the business language. So I want to recognize Ovi and Dirk And of course, the go-to person when it comes to business and lean is Mark Deluzio. So thank you very much, Mark, for being there. Mark is going to start a series called Seat at the Table. All what I did was to open the door, and most of you can walk into the door and take the seat at the table. Mark, anything more you want to add on the various courses that you're running on this topic of seat at the table?
No, we'll go into more detail as we go through on some of these key things. But it's a broad topic, right? It's a lot to talk about. But the more well-rounded from a business perspective, and I'm sure everybody on this call is at different levels, right? But if you could think like I told my client in India, by the way, Dr. M, stop being engineers. Stop thinking like an engineer. Okay. Can I give you one example? Bad materials got into their process. So they wanted to figure out, how did that product get rusty? What happened? Blah, 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 blah. And they were worried about, how did the product get rusty? That's not where my head's at. My head's at, how was it allowed to get into the manufacturing process first? Before we solve that problem, we got to solve that one first. How did we allow it to get in? So stop thinking like an engineer. Okay. You want to go right into the mechanics of how it got rusty, right? No. I want to know how it was allowed to come in, right? That's my first question, because that to me tells me that we're broken in terms of our standardization and discipline. Easy, right? So if you could think more along the lines of a business approach, and maybe the thing in the back of your mind you always think is, how can I create a competitive weapon for my business with everything that I'm doing? Right. Now, that also means you're going to need to decide what not to do. Because if you try to do everything, you know darn well what's going to happen, right? It's not going to work. It's not going to work. So, and by the way, when I say make a decision not to do anything, what you're not going to do, what I mean by that is, it may be over a certain time frame. Hey, in the next 6 months, we're not going to do these things. It doesn't mean that they're not important. As a matter of fact, some of them might be on a critical path, right? It doesn't mean that you're just going to decide to do 3 things and that's all you're going to work on. But maybe for this year or for the next 6 months, we're not working on this, and this. Okay? Because it's going to defray. We're going to have what we call a resource collision, all right? Where people got overloaded with all kinds of stuff. And, you guys have seen this before, I'm sure, right? I'm sure it all happened to you. I know it happened to me. It's called resource collision, where your resources are just colliding, and you're trying to do all kinds of things, and you're just not effective at all. You're not gonna you're not gonna be effective in that regard. So, so how do you create that competitive weapon? Doing what you guys do. That's what you want to think about. Now, that's a good conversation to have with your leadership. Okay. So, and by the way, what's going to follow is respect for people and engagement. I mean, I think the easiest way to engage people is put them on Kaizen teams. I mean, to me, it's not a big mystery. We have all these consultants out there with engagement techniques. God, just put them on freaking Kaizen teams. My God. We did it with a UAW shop. They were thrilled to do this stuff. And it doesn't have to be, and I guess the other thing I think about is how you want to set a perfect scenario first before you start engaging people. Well, wait a minute, how are you going to do that? Kaizen is the way to get that. But if you're going to hold off on Kaizen until you set the tables perfectly, where everybody in leadership singing Kumbaya, right? And everybody's holding hands now that everybody got it, right? It's not going to work. And leadership is not going to be in concert with you. You're always going to have a bell curve. Um, just start. Just start. Get your people on Kaizen teams and ask them for their ideas. Let them make mistakes. And by the way, if you don't guarantee no layoffs because of lean improvements, then I would argue, good luck. Not going to work. Not going to work. Because they will find ways to fabricate overtime and fabricate job security. They have to have the confidence that they're not going to be laid off if they come up with an idea that eliminates their job. And if you really do believe that you can grow the business through these improvements, that shouldn't be a concern. So,
Mark, I'm going to smuggle my hidden agenda. Now that you said stop thinking like an engineer, I'm going to start getting the group intelligence going, and let's get the group quotient going. My hidden agenda. Thank you very much, Mark. And I'm going to stop recording. Thank you very much to all of you. Namaste. I'm going to stop recording. But those who want to hang around and want to ask Mark questions, go ahead. I'm taking pre-approved consent from Mark to do that. So I'm going to stop recording. Thank you very much for being there for me.